How's it going, guys? I'm Robert from Machado Visuals, and I have a few quick first impressions on the new Sony FX6. Now, a lot of people are still waiting for this camera, likely due to a factory fire where the components are created. So people have been slowly receiving their orders, and I was lucky enough to be one of them. After spending a bit of time with the camera, I do have a few quick thoughts. Right off the bat, overall operation is super responsive. Things like jumping into thumbnail view or even turning on the camera happen super quickly, much quicker than the FX9. Even going to S&Q mode is super zippy. There's also a new quick format option which formats insanely fast and helps solve one of my biggest grievances when prepping media on the FS7 or FX9. The menus are a near perfect match to the FX9, which I find super helpful as an FX9 owner. A lot of newer owners are expressing frustration with this menu layout, but there's really nothing new here. If you spend any considerable amount of time with the camera, you'll learn to know the menus like the back of your hand. Just my 2 cents. Making a comeback is the dual native ISO that seemingly made its appearance in the A7S III. Of course, I'm happy to admit I was wrong from my previous video where I thought the A7S didn't have dual ISOs, but just like Trump, I don't mind waiting a few months before conceding. Sony doesn't want to claim it as a true dual native ISO because it does take a hit on dynamic range, and looking at high base 12,800, you can definitely see the noise present. It's definitely a good starting point in case you need it, but for my money, I'd probably rate the high base exposure index slightly lower to clean up the image and push down the noise floor. I'd also like to note that I found a number of stuck pixels when using high base ISO. Just looking at the monitor, I found around 5 pixels just hanging out. Also, really quick regarding exposure indexes, it looks like a lot of people new to CineAI are having difficulty understanding how that mode works. If you fall within that boat, I made a video several months ago explaining how to work with exposure indexes. LUTs have improved dramatically with this camera. For starters, you can view a LUT in 1080p. For whatever silly reason, you're not able to do this on the FX9, and it drives me insane because whenever clients ask for 1080 acquisition, I die a little bit inside only because it means I have to monitor an S-log when operating. Another improvement on the FX6 is the ability to view LUTs during playback. On the FS7 and FX9, you're limited to looking at S-log during playback, so I usually use Gamma Display Assist instead, which tends to look a lot worse. You're now able to play clips captured in CineAI or custom mode without having to switch your base setting. This was pretty annoying in previous iterations. There have been a handful of times where I've used both modes during a single job and I've needed to change modes anytime I wanted to check playback. This camera's power draw is pretty similar to the FS7, which sips on power, giving me much more use out of the many BPU 30 batteries I have laying around. One BPU 30 gives me around an hour and a half of runtime, and a BPU 60 gives about 2.5 hours. This also makes it even easier to travel with since you can cram a ton of smaller batteries in your kit. Now, there's no Super 35 mode, but you can use clear image zoom, similar to alpha cameras, to crop out the vignette. Since you're cropping the sensor though, you do take a hit on image quality, and suffice to say, this is a full frame design, and I don't plan on throwing any Super 35 lenses on this camera. One issue I always ran into with the FS5 was the lack of IBIS, and the FX6 is no different. Anything past 15mm handheld starts to get a little tricky, and given how light the camera body is, it becomes a little difficult shooting with a handheld feel that isn't too distracting. It's important to note that although the FX9 doesn't have IBIS, the body has just enough heft to it that the micro jitters are effectively smoothed over. I hate this thing with a passion. The monitor mount is so loosey-goosey, and I wouldn't even wish it upon my own worst enemy. The slightest movement is enough to rotate the screen, and there's seemingly no way to tighten the tension or use a third-party mount. If I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments, but I haven't seen a way to adjust the mount so far. You might be better off using your own 5-inch monitor, since the included viewfinder isn't necessary to operate the camera. You're now able to output HDMI and SDI simultaneously, and not only that, but also output 4K signals simultaneously. This was another one of my gripes with the FS5, and now there's a lot more flexibility when monitoring. I also like the fact that a lot of these signals are progressive rather than PSF like the FS7. This means that they should play nicely with switchers for live feeds without having to use something like a cross converter. If you appreciate my content here on YouTube, I've recently started a Patreon to help support the channel and continue the conversation. There are a handful of exclusive perks, such as a Discord server where you can better get in touch with me or the community. Hopefully this video is helpful in some way. I'm really excited about this little camera. I'm planning on using it as my full-time YouTube camera since it has everything I want from a professional workflow and is much easier to manage rather than building out cameras in between jobs. I do have some thoughts regarding where this camera lies within Sony's lineup, and that video will be out next week, so be sure to keep it locked on the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.